All right, gang. Will you all go ahead and get cell phones, earbuds, and Chromebooks. If your Chromebook is out, you can leave it out, but just close it. You won't need it for the moment. You will need it in just a sec. What I want to do, so there's a couple things that I want to do, and one of them is I want to walk you through a exploration of one organism in that tree of life, and I want you all to document what I come up with, and you can use this as part of the assignment. For some of you, this may be like most of what you get for that assignment, which is fine. If you didn't have a chance to start it on Wednesday, this is all you're going to have, and that is okay. That's going to count for full credit. But what I want to do is make sure that you understand how cool this is. I want you to think about what we're looking at in a way that emphasizes the cool factor. And then the other thing that I want you to do is to recognize some of the information you can get from this tool, because it's like an incredible resource. And if you are a biologist, of course, this is something that you're going to use all the time. But even as a non-biologist, many of you are going to have times in your life where you need to know information about some sort of an organism. And this could be a place where you could get some. So I want to walk you through that whole process. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to have something to write with and write on. And this is something that you can either give to me, you can write your name on it and turn it in by hand, or you can submit it through Canvas. Either way is fine. It's going to be, for those of you who got started on the Tree of Life assignment on Wednesday, this will be kind of added to that. For those of you who didn't get started, this is going to be what you turn in. So let me start while you're getting stuff to write on. Does anybody need paper, pencil, anything like that? While you're getting yourselves ready, let me just kind of throw out the idea that like hundreds of years ago, people did not really think about all living organisms being related to each other. It's not how we thought about things. If you were a human being living in the early Common Era, right? So sometime between 500 and 1000 AD, you would have just looked around and you saw all these organisms, and sure, you saw that some of them looked similar. Like it might be, two kinds of birds that looked really similar that were sort of hard to tell apart. And some of them you could tell, we knew that there were groups of things. Like when you look at a sparrow and you look at an eagle, and it's got these things in common: beaks and feathers and flying and laying eggs. And so you knew that they were grouped together. But the idea that they were actually related wouldn't have made sense to you. You wouldn't have thought, well, these two things are related, because we didn't understand the idea that that organisms, all the different kinds of organisms that we see, descended from one single common ancestor, and that there were incremental changes along the way that added up over literally billions of years to end up with this incredible diversity. We just thought everything was here, and it always had been here, just the way that it was. So as we started to realize, holy cow, these things are not just similar looking. We're not just grouping them together because they look similar. They're actually connected to each other more fundamentally than that. We had to come up with a description for what this looked like. And we came up with this idea of the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life has been around for a few hundred years. It doesn't, like a while ago, did not look the way that it looks now. Obviously, they didn't have computers, and we didn't put nearly as many things on it. We didn't know about bacteria, but we figured out, if there are two things that are not the same, we know they're not the same, but they look incredibly similar and they behave really similarly, then they're going to be closer together on this tree of life. And we didn't understand how it worked. We didn't really understand like the scale of evolution. We didn't understand the process of evolution. We just knew, okay, well, there's more to this than just they look the same and they act the same. And one of the things that's really interesting is if you take like 10 things and you take these two and you group them together, and then you take these three and you group them together because they're really similar and they kind of behave the same, and there's some things about them. Then as you do that, one of the things that you find is that if you take this group of three things and this group of two things, you start to see some similarities there as well. So, and that's kind of interesting because like we realize like, okay, we can take, like we can sort of categorize it in larger and larger groups, organizational groups. So for example, if you look at like sparrows and finches, they're both these little small birds and they have similar shaped beaks and they have similar habitats. We know that they are kind of close together. If you take eagles and hawks, they're both big birds, they're birds of prey, like they do the soaring thing, so they're kind of similar. But then, if you look at those two groups, we realize, well, they are part of this bigger group that all have beaks and feathers and fly and lay eggs. And then you look at that group and you're like, well, they have 4 limbs, right? 2 legs and 2 wings, those are 4 limbs. And those organisms are all kind of one big group. All of the organisms that have 4 limbs, they kind of are like related to each other. Not as closely related as an eagle is to a hawk, not even as closely related as eagles and hawks are to finches and sparrows, but they are all part of one much bigger group that includes humans and donkeys and birds and salamanders. All those organisms are really closely related. And so as we started grouping individual organisms and then putting groups together, we started to see all these patterns emerge. And one of the really key things that we realized is that we can often describe groups, particularly animal and plant groups, in terms of features that they have that seem to give them some sort of survival or reproduction advantage. And we call those features adaptations. And an adaptation is like, we could make the argument that anything is an adaptation. So for example, I have no hair on the top of my head, well, very little, so I'm bald. Is baldness an adaptation for some humans? I mean, maybe it makes me a little bit more aerodynamic. If we went out to the track right now and raced, I would be faster than all of you, largely because I'm more aerodynamic. Is anybody here run track? Anybody here do cross country? Andrew? You do track?
Yeah.
I can run faster than you because I'm more aerodynamic because of my baldness, right? So is that an adaptation? Probably not. I mean, first of all, that's baloney. And second of all, it's probably not something we would consider to be an adaptation. But you know what is an adaptation about humans is our thumbs. That's pretty unique. Not all organisms, very few, in fact, have opposable digits that allow us to pick things up more easily. You can pick stuff up without using your thumbs. We do it all the time. I can pick up this coffee cup by the handle. I can pick up this pen like this. I can pick up my avocado breakfast. But let's face it, some things are easier to pick up with our thumbs. If I want to pick up this piece of string, it's a lot easier to pick it up between my thumb and forefinger like this than it is to try to scoop it up with just my fingers. I can do it, but it's easier with the thumb. And you can sort of imagine now with humans, like we have so much technology, we've got so much going on that we don't generally think about our thumbs being something that give us some sort of advantage when it comes to survival or like reproduction. But 100,000 years ago, it certainly was. We could get food that other organisms might not be able to get. Little berries might have been easier for us to pick, for example. We can do things like manipulate tools, which means we could, for example, plant seeds. there's a reason that very few organisms, humans are one of the very, very few organisms that do any sort of like farming, right? That other organisms don't really farm. There is some like organization like that you could sort of, there's sort of an analogy, but it's not real farming. We're the only ones that do stuff like that, and a lot of it boils down to our dexterity because of our thumbs. So that's an adaptation. So one of the things that I want you all to see this morning is that every organism and every group of organisms has some unique features that help them survive and reproduce. And those unique features are called adaptations, and they can be really interesting to look at. So, so here's what I want to do. We're going to go through the questions on the Tree of Life worksheet. You don't have to write these questions down. We're going to look, so what Mr. Fiskin wanted you to do was pick one animal, one plant, and one microbe. A microbe is like something small you can't really see. Typically, it's a single-celled organism. And we're going to pick a microbe. And the reason is because I sort of wonder if a microbe is one that you found, like, maybe it was a little challenging for you, or maybe you found one, but it just wasn't that interesting. But I have a microbe that I thought would be kind of interesting for us all to look at. So we're going to go through questions 4, 5, and 6 together, and I want you all to write down what I show you, so that and then that can be turned in as either part of or all of this assignment. So the organism that we're going to look at is called Plasmodium, and it is. Oh, hang on, I might need to. Here we go. It is, Falciparum, Plasmodium falciparum. So I'll bring this up and then I'll write the name so that you can write it down, because this one is definitely not an easy name to write down. So Plasmodium falciparum. And this is, so many of you have probably heard of the disease malaria. This is also known as the malaria parasite. And that's why we're going to look at it, because it's really kind of interesting to think about, like, many human diseases are caused by living organisms. Like, we know about bacterial infections. We know about viruses. Viruses aren't really alive, but we can think about them as, in some ways, as being living organisms. They have genetic material, and like there's some things about viruses that make them either really close to living organisms. Some people think about them alive. And then there's parasites, like this particular one, which is a single-celled organism with a really complicated lifestyle, and that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at these adaptations. So let's go to the questions real quick and make sure that we get everything answered. So the first thing is, what's the closest living relative to this organism? And when did the last common ancestor of these species live? So let's go back to our Tree of Life. And we're going to look at this Plasmodium falciparum. And to see the closest living ancestor, what we do is we zoom out just enough that we can see a branch point that has this organism on one side. Hey guys, Sam, will you take your headphone here? We can see that it's got the organism that we're looking at on one side of the branch, and then the other side of the branch continues. In some cases, it's going to continue just one species. In most cases, it's going to continue to at least two, sometimes a lot more. These branches, each of these branches can look like an entire tree as you zoom in. We have two organisms here that are closely related to our malaria parasite. And they have weird names. Plasmodium gaboni, I've never heard of that. Plasmodium bilbri, I've never heard of that either. And you know what? It's probably not that important to write down these species and like be real careful about the documentation. What's more important is just to recognize that the genus is the same. So our malaria parasite has the genus Plasmodium, and its two closest relatives are really closely related. So let's just write that. So the closest relatives are also Plasmodium species. And one of the things that that the assignment is asking for is, how long ago did this species diverge from all the other species that were part of the same branch? And in this case, we could zoom in. I don't think we know. I don't think that information is there. So let's take a look. See, if we zoom in, are we gonna get, see, there's no year there. So let's go back and see if we can find some information about time anywhere. Holy cow, there's all these plasmodiums. Look at this, plasmodium, 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 and we don't know any of these times, but there's still plasmodiums, still plasmodiums, still plasmodiums. And now we see something different. So here's some different stuff. So we still don't see a time though. We just, like some of these we just don't know. Yeah, I mean, we can go back quite a ways. I'm not seeing a time for many of these. So we don't know yet. So I think that's fair. Like, we don't know. We don't, and here's what's kind of interesting about this. There's a reason that we don't know. Does anybody have a guess why we don't know? Clancy?
Generally speaking, we rely on the fossil record to calculate these things, and they're very hard to
Exactly. What we do to figure out how long ago something evolved is we look at the fossil record. You know what doesn't show up in the fossil record? Single-celled organisms. Now we're gaining the ability to figure some of this stuff out. We've figured stuff out about evolutionary rates. And so one of the things that we can do is we can start to do some guesswork to look at how many actual changes in DNA sequences there are between two different groups of organisms, and use that to estimate how long ago they diverged. We can also, especially with parasitic organisms, we can sometimes find evidence of these organisms in other organisms' fossil remains. So we can do a little bit of dating that way. But yeah, it's really tough to get any information about dates if we don't have any fossils. So we can just say unknown divergence for that next question. We don't know how long ago these two species separated. So let's take a look then at the last and what I think is the most interesting question here. Well, I guess there's two more, but this one is the one that I really want to focus on. So this is about adaptations. So list two adaptations this organism has evolved to help it grow, survive, and reproduce. So how do we figure that out? Well, if we click on the actual picture of the organism, it'll load up the Wikipedia page. And the Wikipedia page is full of information. And one of the things that I was seeing in the 7th period class yesterday is a lot of people were doing what I think many of us would do in this situation. It makes perfect sense. Is you just look at something and you write it down. So the parasite is transmitted through the bite of a female mosquito. Okay, and let's see. Giovanni Grassi elucidated the complete transmission from a female Anopheline mosquito to humans in 1898. So write down those two things, right? Is that wrong? Would that information be incorrect? Do you understand what that means? Does anybody understand what the second thing? You can't read this, I know, but it says, Giovanni Battista Grassi elucidated the complete transmission from a female Anopheline mosquito to humans in 1898. Do you know what that means? Huh? Transmission of what? I mean, we could get all sorts of things from this Wikipedia page, but if you just write down something that you don't understand, then you're not really learning anything and you're not really thinking about it. So let me give you a couple of interesting things to think about. First of all, when we talk about transmission, what we're saying is that this particular organism gets into humans from a different organism. And in this case, and I know you can't read this, but I'll read it to you. It says, infection in humans begins with the bite of an infected mosquito. So let's go back to this idea of an adaptation. An adaptation is some sort of unique characteristic or quality of an organism that allows it to survive or reproduce. So here's something that is really cool about the organism that we're looking at. And that is that it is transmitted to humans from mosquitoes. And let me ask you this, has anybody here,
Are we supposed to write that down?
That's one of our two adaptations. So it is transmitted to humans from mosquitoes. It has evolved the ability to be taken into one organism and put into a different one. That pretty crazy way of ensuring that you stay alive. So let's think about this for a second, because I think many of you know something about this. Has anybody here ever traveled out of the country? Raise your hand if you've ever traveled out of the country. Has anybody here